Christmas it can be a very exciting time. It can be a very joyous time. It can be a very jolly time, right? But there's also a kind of a dark side to Christmas that we don't talk about. And I know we've been talking about it for the last couple weeks. And the theme of the title of our series that we've been in is called Christmas Nightmares. Because let's be honest, not everybody experiences Christmas as a holly jolly, fun, exciting time. There are people who don't have family to spend the holidays with. There are people who don't have money to buy presents for their kids. There are people that have a nightmare family to deal with. There's couples that are on the verge of divorce. And the holidays just makes things worse. And you're probably sitting there going, Pastor, I don't want to think about this right now. I want to think about holly and jolly, how this is Christmas Eve. But the truth is that this is a reality. Things aren't always fun, happy. Today I want to talk about plans. Because we have plans, right? We all plan things out. How many of you have ever had a plan for the holidays and it just did not work out, right? Anybody? Yeah, the turkey gets burned, right? The decorations all, get destroyed. The dog eats the tree, whatever. Things just do not go according to plan, right? And the truth is that's a lot like life. We have a plan for our life, and it just doesn't happen the way we think it should. It falls apart on us. And the simple truth is that you and I were never designed to lead our own life. Did you know that? We make all these plans and we say, hey, this is how my life's going to go. This is how my marriage is going to go. These are how my kids are going to act and behave, right? But you and I were never designed to lead our own life. God was always meant to lead us. But many of us resist Him. We resist Him because we want to be in control. We're control freaks, right? I want it the way I want it. I'm okay with you, God, as long as you're on my page, right? We're good as long as you're going to follow my plan. Because we want to choose for ourselves how our life goes. But what happens is that often our life ends in disaster, right? We've planned, we've implemented our plan, and what happens? Disaster. Because our plans fail. But here's the neat thing. God's plans never fail. God's plans always succeed. Literally, God never fails. It is amazing when you really stop to think about it. In fact, even when it looks like God has been beaten, God has failed, he messed up, everything turns around and He's back up on top. I mean, look at the cross. If you look at the cross in that situation, the enemy, the devil, thought he won. He was high-fiving his buddies. He was going, yes, we killed God's son. We eliminated God's plan. God was going to save the world somehow through His son. We don't even know how He was going to do it, but He was going to do that. And we stopped it. We stopped it. And then 3 days later, Jesus rises from the dead. And the enemy goes, what the heck just happened? Everything just... And we learned that God had that plan. His plan all along was for Jesus to die on that cross. You see, God's plans always succeed. He never fails. So if you and I are going to be happy, if you and I are going to live a happy life, we've got to stop fighting God and join him. A great example of the futility of resisting God's plans and trying to do things our own way is King Herod. How many of you know that person in the Bible? That's the king who was reigning over Israel at the time when Jesus was born. His name was King Herod. And I want to talk about King Herod just for a little bit today, and then we're gonna close. But King Herod was the king of the Jews. And one day, some wise men from a distant land come to him and say, hey, listen, we saw a star. We know what it means. It means that the new king has been born. So where is he? And of course, this surprises King Herod. And he's like, what? He's freaking out. He's freaking out. And he wants to know what's going on. But listen to this. This is what happens in Matthew chapter 2, verse 1 through 16. And it says this: Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the reign of King Herod. About that time, some wise men from eastern lands arrived in Jerusalem asking, where is the newborn king of the Jews? We saw his star as it rose, and we have come to worship him. King Herod was deeply disturbed when he heard this, as was everyone in Jerusalem. Why was King Herod so disturbed? And the simple truth is that King Herod was not the rightful king. He was put into power by the Romans. In fact, he didn't even come from the line of David. He wasn't even a descendant of Jacob, where all the Israelites came from, right? That was their great-great-great-great-great-granddad, right? He didn't even come from there. He came from Esau, his brother, right? So most of the Jews hated him, and they didn't recognize him as their king. So he was disturbed because his kingdom and his plans were threatened. He had a plan for himself to be king. So if the rightful king shows up, then King Herod's kingdom is going to end, right? Sometimes you and I, we have a plan for our life. We have our own kingdom. We have our own plans. We want to be in charge of our life. We don't want anything or anyone to interfere with those plans. But you and I were never meant to lead our own life. You and I were never meant to be in charge. There are so many things that are out of our control. You and I, we can't see the end result of every single decision that we make, right? Therefore, we make bad choices. We make a bad deal or a bad investment, right? Because we didn't know that this stock we just invested all of our retirement into was a company that's going bankrupt, right? We didn't know that. You see, we can't see the end result of every decision that we're going to make. And that's how come we end up making bad decisions, right? We can't control the reactions and decisions of other people. Have you ever had that problem? You can't control what someone else is going to do. And so we end up in divorce, or we end up in small claims court, or we end up betrayed by a friend. We can't control these things. We can't control circumstances. Natural disasters, car accidents. These are things that are out of our control. So think about that for a moment. There is so much about your life that you can't control. but God can. There is nothing on that list that God can't control. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking, yeah, but you know what? I know Christians who experience all those things that you listed. And you're right. But the difference is this. The difference is that God has a plan. And when we put ourselves in charge, then more often than not, when bad things happen to us, it's because of bad decision making on our part. Right? And there's no reason to think that anything good is going to come out of our bad decisions. Right? Even the times when it wasn't our fault, we don't have the power to make something good come out of it. But listen to this. When God is in charge and something bad happens, we know it's still a part of His plan. And listen to this. In Romans chapter 8, verse 28, it says this, "And we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to His purpose for them." You see, God doesn't promise an easy life, but He does promise that no matter what happens to us, no matter what bad circumstances, bad situations, no matter what someone else does to us, He can bring good out of it. What looks like disaster ends up being something wonderful. Just like the cross. You see, God was always meant to lead us because He can control all those things that you and I can't. Herod had a plan. He had a plan for himself to be king, but God had a different plan. Listen to this in verse 4. It says this. This is Herod, and he says, he called a meeting of the leading priests and teachers of religious law and asked, "Where is the Messiah supposed to be born?" "In Bethlehem in Judea," they said. "For this is what the prophet wrote. And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not least among the ruling cities of Judah. For a ruler will come from you who will be the shepherd for my people Israel." Then Herod called for a private meeting with the wise men, and he learned from them the time when the star first appeared. Then he told them, "Go to Bethlehem and search carefully for the child. And when you find him, come back and tell me so that I can go and worship him too." After this interview, the wise men went their way, and the star they had seen in the east guided them to Bethlehem. It went ahead of them and stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were filled with joy. They entered the house and saw the child with his mother, Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasure chests and gave him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So Herod's plan was for him to be king. But God had a different plan. I want to talk about God's plan just for a moment. God's plan was something different. When you look in that passage we just read, it says something, it says a word, it says Messiah. And if you don't know what that means, it means chosen one. Chosen one. This was no ordinary king. Jesus was no ordinary king. He was the Son of God. He was born to provide forgiveness for the whole world. He was sent to die in your and my place. We talked about this last week. Each and every one of us, we've sinned. And the punishment for sin is eternal death in hell. God set that up long ago, even before we were created. He set it up that way that anybody who rebelled against Him, that's where they would go. When the devil rebelled against God, that's the punishment. He never intended for you and I to be that, to go there. He never wanted that. But when we rebelled, For God to be a just God, he has to send us to that place. Because if he didn't, he wouldn't be just. He can't punish the devil for rebellion and then let us off the hook. Doesn't work that way. So God came up with a new plan. He came up with a plan to pay for our sin himself. He sent his son Jesus to die on that cross for you and I. That was God's plan. Jesus was sent to this earth to die for us and to open up a way for us to have a relationship with God. A new relationship, a relationship where God was in charge of our life, right? Because we were in rebellion to God before. And now Jesus provides the forgiveness so that we can have a fresh relationship with God. And we can put God back in his rightful place in our life with him in control. That was God's plan. Now, interestingly enough, God's plan sounds a lot better than Herod's plan, don't you think? Herod's plan was just, hey, I want to be king. I want to be in control. I want to choose how my life goes. And I want to be in the palace. And God's plan was so much better than that. And if you think about it, it was even better for Herod, right? Because Jesus died for Herod just like he died for you and I. God had such a better plan. In fact, I want to look at something. I want to look at who is better at being in charge. God or Herod? Let's look at that just for a moment. In verse 12, it says this. When it was time to leave, this is talking about the wise men. When it was time to leave, they returned to their own country by another route. This is speaking about the wise men. For God had warned them in a dream not to return to Herod. After the wise men were gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. Get up, flee to Egypt with the child and his mother, the angel said. Stay there until I tell you to return, because Herod is going to search for the child to kill him. That night Joseph left for Egypt with the child and Mary, his mother. And they stayed there until Herod's death. This fulfilled what the Lord had spoken through the prophet. I called my son out of Egypt. Let's think about this for a moment. Who was better at being in charge? Herod or God? Let's look at Herod. Herod decided he could do a much better job at running things than God, right? Herod hatched a plan to trick the wise men into revealing the location of the newborn king. Then he planned to kill him. And by doing that, it would secure his throne. He would be king, and no one could stop him. No one could stand against him. Now let's look at the result of Herod's plan. The result was simple. God simply warned the wise men in a dream not to go back and tell Herod where Jesus was. Herod's plan failed. He wasn't strong enough. He wasn't smart enough to stop God's plan. But let's look at God. Let's look at God and how God did as far as being in charge. God's plan was to send his son to earth to die for the sins of all mankind, so that everyone who believed in him and made him the leader of their life could be forgiven of all of their sins, and they could live in heaven for eternity. Now, when Herod tried to stop God's plan, we learned something amazing about God. he had planned all of this long ago. The prophets who prophesied about Jesus lived hundreds of years before he was even born. And everything that happened, everything that Herod did, fit perfectly in God's plan. God had planned all this. There was nothing that Herod did that made God sweat. There was nothing that God said, oh man, I really got to do something. Man, that guy's tricky, you know? He's really got me going here. Nothing. God had already planned it all out. He knew exactly what was going to happen. And he already had a plan. Everything Herod did simply fit in God's perfect plan. God's like the ultimate chess master. Have you ever played chess before? You know, you always got to think like 10 moves ahead, right? I hate that. I can't do that. I can only do a few moves. But that's God. He's already got the whole board figured out. He knows exactly how it's all going to go, and he's got a plan for it. The real question that needs to be answered is, who is better suited to lead your life? Herod thought he was better at leading than God. But how about you? Who is better at leading your life, you or God? Because God's never going to force you to do anything. He gives the freedom to choose whether we will serve him or not. But you and I can never do a better job than he will. We have to pick a side. Herod chose to follow his own plan. And I want you to see what the result was. Starting in verse 16, it says this: Herod was furious when he realized that the wise men had outwitted him. He sent soldiers to kill all the boys in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old and under, based on the wise men's report of the star's first appearance. Herod refused to surrender to God's plan, and he became a monster. So many innocent people were hurt because of what Herod did. Because he was so bent on being in charge, being in control. And you know what the truth is? For many of us, it's the same way. We are so bent on being in control of our life and resisting God that we're hurting the people around us. We're destroying their life and ours. Because you and I were never meant to lead our own life. We're just not strong enough. We're not capable enough. It's time we stop fighting God. It's time that we start letting God lead us. Do you know he already has a plan for you? Isn't that amazing? He already has a plan for your life. And it's a beautiful plan. It may not be your plan, but it is so much better. But he's not going to force you. You have to choose whether you will serve him or not. So I ask you again, who's better at leading your life? You or him? No matter how hard we try to plan, we'll never be able to do as good as God. The only way that you and I are going to have a successful, happy life is when we stop fighting God and join him.